So, good evening, everybody. We continue on in Perek Membeis, the 42nd chapter. We're holding today on page 120, in the middle of the page. And the Alter Rebbe actually begins, Kol Adam Yisrael Yid Mishiyeh, every Yid, whoever he may be, Kishi Yizbein Bazeh, when he ponders on this. On what? Got to go back to the previous classes. We're obviously not going to repeat the entire Yizbein, so went into about 2-3 classes. So, and understand the Bazeh, you really have to appreciate what Alter Rebbe said in the previous 2 pages, namely the last page and a half. So we'll go right on, and you can find these classes on the TanyaOnline.com website, and it's very easy to access previous classes and all the classes. It's also very easy to follow, and because there's a separate scroll bar for the text, as such easy to follow the class with following along word for word on the text or line by line on the text. So when he says Bazeh, is pondering on everything we spoke about in the last few weeks. And so should we recap? We're not sure because it's going to take a long time, so we're not going to, but just to appreciate the Alter Rebbe is basically, he pointed out, he secured us of the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, here, now, real, in the most, in our minds, most palpable manner possible. Again, this was the Alter Rebbe's brilliant explanation, literally showing us as human beings the actual presence of Hashem. Not only presence of Hashem somewhere hovering from above, but the Alter Rebbe predicates this, the important message here via the Rambam, the famous Rambam, the Rambam, the Alter Rebbe himself, and Tanya brings it quite a few times. Alter Rebbe, Hashem knows everything by knowing himself. It's not that he's looking from where he is onto something else, even though he could have that perfect appreciation of what goes on apparently somewhere else, because he's God. He created ultimately everything, and therefore he can see everything. Ein davar na'el mimeka, but it's much more than that. There's nothing chutz mimenu, there's nothing other than Hashem. So when Hashem sees what's going on in this room, the learning experience, the table, the Tanyas, and so on, and it's because nothing independent of Hashem. Knowing what's going on in his room is the way that Hashem knows what's going on in his room is because he knows himself. It's all part of Hashem. So because it's part of Hashem, his knowledge is much greater, and he is present in the place, in the area, and in the subject that he knows. This is him. Again, we elaborate on this. It's worthwhile. Again, it's worthwhile to see the previous classes to appreciate the Alter Rebbe's culminating message over here once again. The other message in the very last week's class, sometimes when you know something was going on with yourself, not necessarily you could have the accurate attention to the details of what goes on perhaps with yourself because you're impacted with what goes on with yourself. We gave the example, someone pricks someone's toe, so he knows exactly, even though his toe is not in the same room. We gave the example, it's on the other side of the wall. He doesn't see the person pricking him, he doesn't see the needle, he doesn't see his own foot. But no one could deny and say, well, really maybe it didn't happen because you didn't see all that. I know it happened because I feel it. But yet, we can be distracted from the details of what happened now, or maybe, like we said, maybe someone did something to his hand at that time. So he also knows it happens, but he can't analyze exactly what happened because he's impacted from the hurting of the prick to the toe, as an example. And sometimes even that itself is difficult to analyze because of the impact of the hurt. So apparently one would say, okay, Hashem knows everything, but there's so many millions and billions, and again, even in this very world, beyond that, trillions, and you could even say infinite, even though anything associated with Elam Hazeh, you can't really use the term infinite, but there's kind of, you could even, just to appreciate, there's infinite things which are going on every single second, and Hashem is part of Hashem's experience, but isn't he impacted maybe by the big stuff, let's say? So maybe he's not there really, or really caring, but maybe not that much caring at the small stuff. What am I thinking, doing, eating, looking? Because there's a lot of big stuff. So he knows, because he knows himself. but is there? Do I have to be conscious about it? So here the Alter Rebbe says, yes, Hashem is not impacted by everything that goes on. So you have that dual advantage. In other words, when you think about Hashem's knowledge, Hashem's appreciation in certain matters, you have the one hand that he knows it because he knows himself, so that's by definition the maximum clarity one could have in a manner. It's not you're looking from inside out, it is what is transpiring with you yourself. Conversely, Hashem has that advantage, they're not impacted by anything. And because not impacted, again, there's Alter Rebbe's Lashon, which we say every day, we say based on Psukim in Tehillim, which we quoted, Alter Rebbe quotes elsewhere as well, that Hashem is not impacted, so he's not impacted by anything, so his knowledge of the very focus and fixation, if you will, on every detail what transpires in front of him is just infinite, meaning to say there's nothing which could be, by definition, obscured and covered. Hashem had his attention on something else doesn't exist. And again, you could see in the previous classes, that's the bazeh. Whenever Yid, and Alter Rebbe says Yid Mishiyah doesn't have to be a tzaddik, a scholarly person, a special person, a pious, a devoted Yid, a pious Yid. Yid Mishiyah, because it's coming from the perspective of his neshama. Remember, we learned that this is all about the Moshe which exists in every single Yid. And because it's embedded in every single Yid, again, here the Alter Rebbe used the Lashon Yeh Mishiyeh. If you remember, he used it in Perik Yud Ches, which was a very important message. That the Elokus, the Neshama, and the godliness which exists within the Neshama is, in essence, manifest by every single Yid. We say, in essence, manifest, which means yes, by definition of what the neshama is. It says that even Mereisha Vadrago, the Alter Rebbe says, if you don't see it on the surface, it doesn't mean that essentially it's not manifest throughout the entire system. It exists, rather. It exists in a certain perspective. It's manifest as well, as Alter Rebbe proves. That's the same Jew, which maybe was a bit indifferent with a particular mitzvah, but when it comes to the question of announcing or renouncing the oneness of Hashem, he's always there. So in essence, it filters through the entire system, the Lashon Alter Rebbe, Mereisha V'Ad from head to toe, and even someone on the surface, he's considered a Pesha Yisrael, someone who sins, Rachmana litzlan. On the surface, remember we mentioned once, Zer Nefesh Kisechta Bitmiya Tova, the Gimnazeir says, how can he sin? But on the surface, someone is classified because of certain actions, a Pesha Yisrael, but nonetheless, he also has that neshama that ain't so filtering through the entire system. There, the Alter Rebbe also uses Lashon Yeh Mishiyeh, whoever it is, and here the Alter Rebbe uses it again for the same reason, because you're dealing with something which is embedded, hence part and parcel of the neshama, which exists by every single Yid. By definition, if him is a Yid, him or her is a Yid. She is Beinin Bazeh when he ponders on this, again on this which we mentioned, which we learned the last few weeks, of the Eibishter's presence in that fashion, of the Eibishter's knowledge, the appreciation of matters in the fashion we explained. Shog Deilu V'chol Yom, a long hour every day. What is a long hour? Isn't an hour 60 minutes? An hour is an hour. What does it mean a long hour? It's because here Shog doesn't mean an hour on the clock. It means an expansive time. Every person is different. Alter Rebbe even noted in this very chapter over here, there's certain people based on the makeup of their neshama. Again, explained with Alter Rebbe, even though we all have a neshama which is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hashem is one, and neshamas are one, but as they journey through all the elements, the certain neshamas which are impacted by the inferior world. Again, not to go into it now. So yet the neshamas certainly lived and continue to live a cleaner life. So their neshama dikait, the soulness, if you will, is manifest by them. So in order for them, in other words, it's transparent by them, and therefore in order for them to appreciate this result of this pondering, it just takes 10 minutes. That's ready for them, a shog doila, an expansive hour. There's certain people, maybe an hour on the clock is also not enough. They really have to do a bit more, based, and again, from the way they're carved, their neshama is carved. We mentioned also, we can never say, it's always important to know when the Alter Rebbe points this out, it's a sensitive topic, because no one could ever say, oh, you know what, I wasn't sensitive to Hashem's command because maybe in my neshama comes from. First of all, how do you know where your neshama is, where was impacted from, and its journey and its odyssey down into this world? You have no idea. So, and number one, even if you did, Teira Achas L'Kol Hashem demands, hence gives the koyach to every single yid to be pure and clean, machshava dibur ma'aser, and thought, speech, and action when it comes to this which he's not meant to do, and then on the positive side which he's meant to do. And together with every guitar, it makes it easier to melamed zchus, to find favor, conversely in another yid. But generally, everyone is different, and therefore, when a person says shog doila, he doesn't say it on the clock. Everyone is different. What is a shog doila, a long hour for him? So when he ponders on this, for this little shog doila, b'chol yoyim, every day, as the Eibishter fills the supreme worlds and the inferior worlds, mamash, heaven and earth, mamash, really. Again, mamash. Hashem's glory fills this entire land, not one space devoid of Hashem's presence. Hashem's is Hashem Himself. Hashem looks and gazes and examines the intestines and the heart, your intestines and your heart, and all your actions, all your speech, and all your steps. He counts every step in what direction you're going. He counts. And if you think about that, understandably, tikova, and I was ponder on that as something real, tangible, based on, predicated on everything what we learned in the last few weeks. Azai, then, inevitably, tikova belibai, it will be established in one's heart the fear of God for the entire day, the entire day. And even he starts his day in a proper time. Usually the right time is before one davens, which then he has a face-to-face, intimate encounter with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then the whole davening sets the person's tone throughout the entire day. And a very different note, a very different tone, a very different note. It subliminates him and everything associated with him in the entire day. Even though periodically during the day, because of the distractions or the hustle bustle which exists in one human being's life, and it could distract him from that profound focus on this, but nonetheless, he just has to give himself a little reminder. Just align to straighten things out. At that point, he needs to not to do that whole shog day with a long hour. He just needs to yachzer, to just repeat and ponder on this. Even with a light pondering, in every moment, in every hour, and or rather, the pauses after bizbein is kala. So in every moment, in every hour, I believe it's the latter. But even though the message could be on the former also, I believe it's read with the latter, which means but the idea that whenever he has to kind of just reintroduce that thought, he doesn't have to go through the whole shah kala, right? When you have something set up and something goes wrong, you just have to put that little button. You don't have to reset the entire machine, as an example. And so too, just during the day when there is these distractions, sometimes almost inevitable distractions, just have realign. And then inevitably that will right away put you back on the conveyor belt of sur meirav asay tov, that one would be to stay away from evil. This is what Hashem says, again by definition, Hashem says not to do asay tov, and this is what Hashem says to do, the positive, in thought, speech, and action. B'machshava dibur ma'aser, in thought, in speech, and action, which in all three there is the don't and the do. Hashem says not certain things not to do, certain things not to speak, and certain things not to think, not to entertain one's mind. A pasuk explicit in the Torah, the third parsha of Kriya Shema. And so too when it comes to doing, it's the doing the mitzvah, which is about action, and then there's mitzvahs which we do with our speech, of it benching and davening and learning and making a bracha and so on. And then there is with our thought, which is our investment, investing our thought in Limud Torah, in Hizbeinenus, in davening, pondering in the greatness of Hashem, and so on and so forth. So that would become the norm, the default throughout the entire day, every moment, not to rebel, God forbid, in the eyes of Hashem's honor, which fills the entire land. Like the saying of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai to his students, like we said before, that when they gathered around him, I believe it's right before he passed away, they're waiting to hear great chidushim from him. And perhaps they heard, but one of the things he told them, don't sin, basically. He said, fear God like you fear another human being. That when another human being is present, you refrain from doing bad stuff. And he says, at least fear God in the same manner. Just have that appreciation that Hashem is here and now, just like another human being. And you cannot make a mistake when another human being is in that same domain, the same room. And as such, the human being refrains from doing something wrong. Or if he has to do something good, because the other human being is demanding it from him, if it's a boss or anybody else, or somebody wants to find favor, and in any circumstance, it's real, it's tangible. So too, he said, that's the same way you should look at your Creator. Before you climb to the higher levels of Yira, the simple Yira, Hashem is here, Hashem is now, Hashem is Malay Kolaretz Kaveda, so he's a Beichin Kleis Valev, examines heart and intestines. Im Oivde Kara, if you're serving him accordingly, in a befitted manner. And this is the basis of Rabbi Yochanan's message to them. It was simple, but not that simple. Sometimes we, as in life, we take the simple stuff and we make them not that simple, or we ignore them. Sometimes religiously, ignore things which are so simple, but because of this simple, it's like not sophisticated, and therefore we go into things which are deeper and relegate the stuff which are simple. So it seems simple, but the message is very stark, it's profound, it's very clear, it's very poignant. It's a message which you cannot make any mistake. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was really telling them, when someone walks into the room, you can't say, well, maybe this is an image, maybe this is a shadow, maybe this is not real, maybe this is just a glaze, just a ray of something. No, there's a person there. You know there's a person, and you make no mistake that someone is in the room with you. And when you look at Hashem in that same fashion, and Rabbi Yochanan's message is to look at Hashem in the same exact fashion. He's here and now, focusing on what you're going to do, think, and speak, or rather speak, do, speak, and think in the next moment, in the next second. And this is what the Pasuk says, certainly there are different levels of fearing Hashem. One, appreciating the aura of Hashem's greatness, Hashem being the king, Hashem being the Melech Malchem Lachem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the king of all kings. The idea of Hashem's Ein Sof, when one ponders on the Ein Sof of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Yiras HaReimim is that exalted, special, unique type of Yira, obviously exists, and there's many levels. If you learn even a little Tanya or other areas of Chassidus, there's so many levels of Yiras Hashem. And in essence, they're all embedded in the Neshama. But they're to be extracted, extrapolated, and dealt with and worked on in order to the person should come to his shleimus, to his completion as a Yira Shamayim, a true God-fearing Jew. But the Pasuk says, before you go to all those important levels of Yira, you should know I have a Yira for you, which is about Lechas B'chol Derochem, just to go in Hashem's ways. In other words, that's the Yiras Hashem, which is going to perfect the thought, speech, and action. That's the type of Yira what we're talking about over here, and that's the type of Yira which is alluded or explicit in that pasuk. Hashem says, "Ki im liyiras Hashem lekecha," which again, this is the same Yira which Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to Am Yisrael, which the Alter Rebbe begins this chapter, and the quoting that Gemara Ota Yira Milsa Zutrase is Yira something small that Moshe Rabbeinu says. Well, what is Hashem already asking from you? And again, as we explained the question of the Gemara at the very beginning of this chapter, which you can see it, probably the first class on the 42nd chapter. And the pasuk continues, Lo lechas b'chol derochem, because we're dealing with a Yira which is about going in Hashem's ways, which is the Yira mevi l'ki mitzvahs v'yizbarich, the fear which brings to fulfilling Hashem's mitzvahs b'sur mirah, in staying away from this which Hashem says not to do, v'asei tev, and this what Hashem says to do. And this is considered Yira Tata. This is considered the inferior Yira Hanal, like we mentioned before. And And when the Gemara says that in L'gabe Moshe Milsa Zutra, yes, in the face of Moshe, or by Moshe, it's something small, it's something trivial. The Gemara didn't mean to ignore what the pasuk is really saying, that Moshe Rabbeinu was talking to Am Yisrael. He wasn't dealing with himself. No, the Gemara is saying, in the face of Moshe, which exists within you, Yid, as each Yid has this Moshe embedded in him, and in the face of that Moshe, it's something small, meaning you say, because this is part and parcel of who you are. And what is part and parcel of who you are? The Moshe Rabbeinu, which he imparts as das, that clarity and elokus and godliness. And again, that's a program which he embedded into every single Jew. And as such, when you tap into it, the Yirah Shamayim, the fearing God, which would lead to a life of Torah mitzvahs. Again, in the Sur Merah, this Hashem says not to do. Be careful, this Hashem says not to do. Be very careful, this Hashem, and to be careful, this Hashem says. So this is what Hashem says to do, and this is what Hashem says not to do. That's the Lechas B'chol Derechav. This is the type of Yiras Hashem which brings the Kiyum Mitzvahs of Yisbarach, fulfilling Hashem's mitzvahs and Sur Merah Nasei Tov, in staying away from evil, which is generally the mitzvahs Leisasa, the 365 don'ts, Lasei Tov, and all the mitzvahs Asay that we've meant to do. The Rebbe continues and says, Vihi, this Yiro is Yira Tata. This is considered the inferior Yira. As we mentioned, there's so many different levels of Yira. And understandably, every Yid could bring himself. He doesn't have to be limited to this level of Yiras Hashem. And more so, all these different levels, and you're dealing with multiple levels of revering, fearing Hashem, is also embedded into the neshama, meaning attainable, accessible, and so on. But the message of the Alter Rebbe here, and the message of the pasuk, that this is the minimal Yiras Hashem, which is about that clarity and elokus coming from Moshe Rabbeinu, which will inevitably lead to this Yira. That's Milsa Zutra, that's simple, that's small. Again, just to translate the Gemara, Zutra, it's small. So when the Gemara says, yes, by Moshe Rabbeinu, it's small, again, because Moshe Rabbeinu makes it sound like it's so simple. It's a simple meaning of the pasuk. We explained the question in the very beginning of the chapter. I guess it would be the first class in this very chapter. And we explained the Gemara. Moshe Rabbeinu asks Am Yisrael in demands of Am Yisrael this level of Yiras Hashem, in a way like, yeah, this is not such a big deal, but apparently Yiras Hashem perhaps is a big deal. And what does the Gemara answer? Yes, like Moshe Rabbeinu, it's not a big deal, but he's not talking to him about it. He's not talking about it. He's displaying himself. Not about himself, it's about his demand to Am Yisrael. The Alter Rebbe getting it, that we have that Moshe exists within us. It's embedded in every neshama. That's that clarity, the ability to gain clarity in elokus is something that Moshe Rabbeinu imparts with himself. In other words, it embeds in every single Yid. And in the face of that das, in the face of that Moshe, which exists within you, Yid, it's Milsa Zutra. It's something which you could classify as small, meaning to say it's easy to attain, it's easy to tap into, and as such reflect. And my commitment, and my observance, and my being scrupulous with this, which Hashem says not to do, not to speak, not to think, and in the part of Asay Tov, to do, to speak, to think. And this is what the Alter Rebbe concludes this message. Ulagabi Moshe. When the Gemara says Lagabi Moshe, it doesn't mean Moshe Rabbeinu as an individual, this great tzaddik in figure like Moshe Rabbeinu. It's Lagabi in the face of the Moshe Rabbeinu which exists within every single Yid. In the godly soul of every single Yid, Milsa Zutra Sihi, it's something which is easy to attain, hence classify it as Zutra, as something small. The Rebbe concludes again in this brackets, Shadas, or this thought in this bracket, Shadas, or Mekasher, Mitzbein, Binas Alev, Ebchinis Gili, B'machshava, Mamash, Gidulei, V'chei. And this is what Das is all about. It connects, to translate it literally, the depth of the understanding of the heart to a state of manifestation of the conscious mind of a person, as is known, to those who know, Chen literally means Chochmah Nistara, the hidden Chochmah. And this is based on the Alter Rebbe's message throughout this chapter. But going back to the third chapter, which the Alter Rebbe says that every neshama has those 10 faculties. The Chochmah Bina Das, if you remember the way the Alter Rebbe divided, he compartmentalized the Das from the Chochmah Bina. If you see very clearly in the third chapter, he finishes with the Chochmah Bina. And then he goes on to the Midas, the Avas Hashem, Yiras Hashem, which is associated with the 7 Midas, including Malchus, that is. And then he says, V'hadas, and so and so. Why isn't apparently Chochmah Bina Das? And then comes the Midas. And the Alter Rebbe is just showing you firstly the image, the way it's apparent, it's meant to be, meant to work. It's like you have the machine, you put everything together, everything is just perfect. But you got to put the start button on. So the one who is sharing this information with you by that manual as an example, so he shows you step point, step A, step B, step C, and so on. But then he tells you, now push the button. Similarly, that third chapter, famous third chapter, which Alter Rebbe speaks, literally gives an X-ray of what's going on with the neshama. Before, even if you notice in the third chapter, we spoke about it then as well. Alter Rebbe doesn't mention a word about the actual performance of Torah mitzvahs that begins in the fourth chapter. In the third chapter, Alter Rebbe speaks about the neshama experience, and he says that the cognitive faculties are called the mother and the father, and just like parents produce children, so they inevitably produce the children, their offsprings, which are these 7 emotions of the Yid, of the Neshama, which are perhaps part and parcel of the Neshama, as Alter begins the third chapter. The Chesed, the Gvura Tiferes, and in the emotional experience with the love to Hashem, the fear and revering Hashem, and so on and so forth. These are clear offsprings. You understand, you have clarity in the Lakus. Consequently, you start loving, you're driven to this which you appreciate on a cognitive level. And really exists lahavlo anything else. You appreciate that's a good idea, so you gravitate to it. If it's something which the information is about pointing out something which would demand fear or awe or reverence, we're not talking about fear. Sometimes it could be fear of something harming somebody. If the information is about something harmful, that right away ignites a feeling, a sensation of fear. But here, obviously, we're talking about Pachad of Hashem as a king in Melech Malcham HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we're talking about a fear more in the context of reverence. It makes sense. You appreciate it in depth, and again, in depth because it's not on the Chachma level, but namely, or together with the Chachma level, the Bina level, which is about expansiveness in the message. And then the case again of the Neshama experience is about it's about the Elokus appreciation. The appreciation and Elokus on the Bina level as well, which means a total dissecting the concept, which the neshama appreciates and picks up, starting from that Nekud of Chochmah, and then brings it into the world of appreciating, and again in articulation and detail, which that's what Bina is all about. So you appreciate this concept of Elokus in a very broad, elaborative manner. Consequently, you're driven to it. Consequently, if it's the message is about awe and fear, you have fear and awe from it. You revere it. And so to the other midas. Alter Rebbe comes in that very chapter and he says, no, not necessarily. It works exactly like that. Apparently it should. Ava v'ima is called, Chacham Bina called Ava Eim. The Rebbe says you need the here. The Rebbe begins in the end of the chapter. You can see it in the end of the third chapter. Probably the last class, I would guess. It's the end, towards the end of the third chapter. You can just scroll down to the third chapter, and it would probably be the very last class. The Rebbe says, V'hadas. What is V'hadas? The Rebbe goes on to explain there. He says, even though you have clarity in certain matters, you give many times the example. You give a beautiful class on it. And to give a class, you have to understand what you're saying, usually. But let's say you do. You actually gave a very beautiful class on these lofty, divine, sacred concepts. Does it mean that you became a better person, more of a godly person? Or your midas were refined, became more godly, sublime? Not necessarily. The Rebbe's Lashon is Demiyan of Shav. Demiyan is Shav. It could be an illusion. In other words, you are not impacted, perhaps even at all. Yeah, certainly you're investing your mind in things which are holy and sacred, obviously better than thinking or investing your mind in other things. And one way or another it has some type of impact. But to say that it was a transformative experience, no, not necessarily. And this is where the Alter Rebbe brings in, he says, you need that faculty of das. Because without das, again, the lashon of the Demyon is shav. Shav means it's a total illusion. If you think you do have that love and fear, you're lying to yourself, basically. That's shav. That's the meaning of shav. It's just not true. So, how do I ignite my emotions to Hashem? The Rebbe says, after you have the message in detail and articulation, and appreciate it in its maximum detailed manner, then there's a whole experience of literally becoming intimate with the concept. This is what Alter Rebbe will use the lashon Adam Yoda es Chava. When he speaks about Adam relating with Chava, Teirah uses the lashon Yoda, what he knew. No, it's a different type of knowledge. And in this case also, the Alter Rebbe's message there in the end of the chapter, and again the message over here, it's that pondering on it as something real, as something tangible. Pondering on that same thing that you knew in the world of intellect, but now becoming intimate with a concept that allows the energy to rush from mind to heart, and the heart will be ignited with a love, a fear to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a true love, a true fear, a true refinement of one's characters. So there he speaks about the connection of Das, and again, it's worthwhile to look there. Much as we explained it over here, it comes out much clearer in the place where the Alter Rebbe uses. He says Das anchors. It anchors something. And again, he explains it because intellect, by definition, is something which is abstract. Intellect, by definition, is something transcendent. So as much as you have clarity on a matter, or you're able to appreciate a matter in the world of Chachma Bina, and as wisdom and understanding, as it's translated, because by definition it's removed. So how would you expect that to ignite something which is part and parcel of you, of your experience, your emotions, your love, your fear? So you need something to connect it, which is the Das, as the Alter Rebbe explains it there, and the message over here, and the Alter Rebbe uses, again, this is the same lashon over here, Das u'mekasher. In this context, it's a bit different wording, even though the message is the same here. We're dealing of bringing this, which is part of the Binas Halev, which is removed, abstract. The lashon Alter Rebbe is it's like under the earth. You have it, it's in your property, but you cannot change your life with that chest of gold, or your life will not be changed if it just remains in your property. You have to dig it out, extract it, incorporate it into your lifestyle for your life to really change. This is the faculty of Das, and this concept. It could be all clear in the world of Bina, but it's Binas Halev, it's very deep. It didn't become part of your reality. This is what is so unique of the Das, and that it connects the mitzvayim. Mitzvayim is what tzafun. This is hidden in the bina of your heart, the understanding of your heart, and it becomes gilui, in this case, b'machshava, in your consciousness, that it would reflect in your thought and speech and action, in this which you're not supposed to think, speak, or do, and in the positive, in the aseta, this which you are meant to think, speak, or do, and to do. And this das is what Moshe Rabbeinu is all about. Moshe Rabbeinu represents, again, as we learned, the supreme das of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is what Moshe Rabbeinu imparts with himself and embeds into every single yid. So we have the ability, that das within us, again, that Moshe, which exists within every single yid, and simply to tap into it, to bring godliness to a total new, different level. Again, not more understanding of the world of Bina, but simply, when we say at a different level, to have that clarity, that transparency, that crystal appreciation of the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is again coming from Moshe Rabbeinu, conversely embedded into becomes part and parcel of it, every single yid. And when we tap into it, and we know it exists, and we tap into it, it'll inevitably produce this perfect alignment with Shulchan Aruch, the way Hashem wants us to live. And more so, when we tap into it, that Moshe exists within it, by each of us, it's Milsa Zutra, say it's something small. It becomes the kind of the default of every single Yid, man,